Hello again, wanderer of time. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And what hour has found you here between shadow and silence? Because now we step deeper into a world where loyalty is tested and whispers carry the venom behind veils. The harem never forgot that night. Though Pharaoh's wrath had silenced their tongues, their eyes burned hotter than ever. Behind silken curtains, they whispered like serpents in the dark, weaving stories sharper than blades. She turned Pharaoh against us. She lies awake plotting, even as we sleep. Why should one woman devour what belongs to many? They smiled when Pharaoh entered, their voices sweet with honey. But when he left, their laughter turned brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Even the servants grew restless. Some refused to serve me, claiming illness, slipping away when summoned. Others watched too closely, their silence heavier than words. At night, I felt their eyes upon me as I passed, their footsteps echoing too near, too long. The council chamber mirrored the harem's venom. Nobles praised Pharaoh's justice in public, yet in private they whispered of tyranny. A man ruled by love is no ruler at all. Egypt bleeds while he guards his flame. If she falls, perhaps he will rise again. Pharaoh thundered at them, but each outburst only deepened their resolve. I saw it in their lowered gazes, their bowed heads. Submission only in form, not in heart. One evening, as I crossed the garden, I found the fountain fouled, its waters darkened with ash, its lotus blossoms torn and trampled. Upon the stone rim, a single word was scrawled in crimson: die. My breath caught, the beads at my throat searing. I pressed them to my lips, whispering into the night. They strike not with daggers alone, but with venom that seeps into every stone, every heart. I am flame, but flame cannot burn forever against a storm of shadows. And in the catacombs, the high priest listened to the reports brought by his spies. He closed his eyes, his voice a low hymn. Good. Let them hate her. Let them poison her with their whispers, their plots, their eyes. She does not need to die by our hand. Egypt itself will devour her. The tension broke during a council assembly. The chamber was crowded with nobles, generals, and priests of Pharaoh's new order. The air itself seemed brittle, heavy with unspoken words. One noble, emboldened by whispers that had spread like weeds, rose from his place. He bowed low, his silken robe brushing the floor, and spoke with venom wrapped in silk. My lord, Egypt bleeds. The people cry out. They say shadows grow stronger, that the gods themselves turn their eyes. They say... He paused, his gaze flicking toward me. They say flame consumes Pharaoh as surely as it consumes Egypt. The chamber froze. All eyes turned to Pharaoh. My heart clenched, the beads at my throat biting into my skin. For a breath, Pharaoh's silence felt like a blade above me. Then his staff struck the floor with a crack that shook the chamber. His voice thundered, fierce and raw. Enough! She is no curse, she is Pharaoh's flame. She burns not Egypt, but its enemies. Without her, the throne would lie in ashes, the people devoured by shadows. You dare spit venom against her? You spit against Pharaoh himself. The noble collapsed to his knees, trembling, but the damage was done. The chamber erupted in murmurs, some in fear, others in anger. Generals shifted uneasily, nobles clenched their jaws, and even Pharaoh's allies bowed their heads in silence too long, too heavy. That night, the city knew. Word spread faster than the Nile's flood. Pharaoh had defended me again, calling me his flame before the court. But instead of calming unrest, it stoked it. In the streets, people cried, "See?" Pharaoh kneels to her. She rules through his lips. He is blinded, enslaved by the cursed flame. Egypt is hers and ours no longer. The harem seethed, their whispers now open curses. The nobles plotted deeper, their smiles tighter. And the priests in the catacombs lifted their chants, their voices triumphant. For though Pharaoh had roared, the echo that lingered was not his strength, it was his weakness. The world now knew he would defend me at any cost. And so, every dagger meant for him would first be aimed at me. That night, as Pharaoh slept with his head upon my lap, I stared into the dark, my heart hollow, my whisper breaking. His love is my shield. His love is my doom. And the more he defends me, the faster Egypt turns against us both. Thebes no longer whispered. It shouted. Within days of the council, the markets turned into arenas of rage. Merchants overturned their own stalls, crying that Pharaoh's taxes bled them dry. Farmers poured sand into baskets of grain, shouting that the Nile itself had been cursed by the flame. At night, fires burned in the streets. Not offerings, but defiance. Statues of Pharaoh were dragged down, their faces smashed into dust. My likeness, carved hastily in clay and marked with beads, was shattered beneath 100 feet. The chants grew bolder, swelling like thunder. Down with the flame! Down with Pharaoh! Shadows endure. The palace gates trembled nightly beneath fists and stones. The guards held, but their eyes betrayed fear, some even lowering their weapons rather than strike their kin. And it spread beyond Thebes. Messengers brought word of unrest in Memphis, in Abydos, even whispers from the Delta. Towns refusing tribute, villages raising the old chants in secret. Egypt itself was cracking. Pharaoh raged in the throne room, his staff striking the floor until it split. Let them riot, let them burn. Pharaoh's wrath will crush them all. But generals exchanged uneasy glances. Nobles bowed too quickly, their eyes averted. Even the palace guards tightened their grips upon their spears, their silence louder than any cry. In the harem, the women no longer hid their triumph. One spoke boldly, her voice sweet as venom. See how Egypt rises? The gods themselves move against her. Pharaoh defends her. But who will defend Pharaoh when the kingdom burns? Their laughter slithered like smoke. That night, I stood at the balcony, the city below glowing with fires, chants echoing into the sky. The beads at my throat burned like chains. I whispered into the night. This is no longer whispers, no longer plots. This is storm. And when it breaks, no palace wall, no crown, no love can stand against it. Far below, in the catacombs, the high priest raised his arms before his followers. His voice was exultant, triumphant. The people rise, the nobles conspire, the harem poisons, the generals waver. Flame is cornered, Pharaoh falters. Egypt returns to its gods. The throne will fall not by our hand, but by Egypt's. It began at dawn. The sound rose first like distant thunder, drums, voices, footsteps. By the time the sun lifted over the Nile, the square before the palace was already a sea of bodies. Men, women, even children, their faces painted with ash, their fists gripping stones, torches, and broken spears. Their cries shook the very walls. Down with Pharaoh! Down with the flame! Shadows endure! From the balcony, I looked down and felt the earth itself tremble beneath their fury. The gates shuddered with every strike, the bronze hinges screaming. Guards braced their shields, spears lowered, but their faces were pale. For these were not enemies from foreign lands. They were Egypt itself. Pharaoh appeared beside me, his crown blazing in the sun. He lifted his staff high, his voice booming across the square. You dare raise your hands against Pharaoh's house? You dare curse the flame who burns for Egypt? Then face Pharaoh's wrath. The mob answered with stones and fire. Torches arced through the air, smashing against the gates, flames licking upward. The drums beat faster, the chants thundered louder. The generals urged Pharaoh to strike. Release the archers, my lord. Cut them down before they breached the gates, but Pharaoh hesitated. His eyes darted toward me, seeking my counsel. My heart thundered, my breath caught. I knew the choice: strike and drown Egypt in its own blood, or hold and risk the throne itself consumed. Before I could speak, the gates groaned, splintering under the assault. With a roar, the mob surged forward, crashing into the courtyard like a flood. Chaos erupted. Guards clashed with citizens, bronze against bone. Screams tore the air, blood stained the stones. Women hurled torches from rooftops, children shrieked, men swung axes against the palace doors. And in the heart of it, their eyes sought me. Fingers pointed, voices howled. There, the cursed flame. Kill her, and Egypt is free. Arrows hissed through the air, one striking the pillar beside me, splintering stone. A spear clattered at my feet. The mob pressed closer, their fury a storm ready to consume me whole. Pharaoh roared, his staff raised, his guards forming a wall around me. Back! Back, or Pharaoh will drown you all in fire. But their cries only grew louder, their fury unbroken. And as I clutched the beads at my throat, trembling in the smoke and chaos, I knew. This was no longer a revolt. It was war. The courtyard became a furnace. Screams tore the sky, steel clashed against stone, and smoke curled thick as night. Guards fell beneath the flood of their own kin, blood pooling around the steps of the palace. Torches devoured banners, flames licked the marble walls, and still the mob pressed forward, their voices one endless roar. Kill the flame! Down with Pharaoh, I stood at the balcony, the beads burning at my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Below, I saw faces twisted with hate. Mothers, fathers, children, all with eyes fixed on me as though my death alone could quench their fury. Pharaoh strode into the chaos, his crown blazing, his staff raised high. His roar split the air. Egypt belongs to Pharaoh. Touch my flame, and the Nile itself will drown you. But the mob did not falter. Arrows hissed past him, one striking his shield, another grazing his arm. His blood smeared the gold, yet his eyes burned brighter than fire. The generals cried out, their voices desperate. My lord, we must strike them down. Order the archers, order the fire. Pharaoh's gaze turned to me, searching, pleading. And in that heartbeat, I saw the choice that tore him apart. If he unleashed his wrath, Egypt's blood would flood the streets. If he held his hand, the throne itself might fall. A stone struck the balcony near me, shattering the stone, dust stinging my eyes. The mob screamed louder. Kill her! Kill the curse! Pharaoh's staff shook in his grip. His face, carved with rage and torment, lifted to the heavens. And then his voice came, low at first, then thunderous. Enough! If Egypt demands blood, then Pharaoh will give it. Not mine, not flames, but Egypt's own. He raised his staff, the signal unmistakable. The sky split with a hiss of arrows. From the walls, the archers loosed in black waves, shafts raining down upon the crowd. Screams turned to wails, torches dropped, blood stained the square. The mob broke, scattered, trampling their own in panic. But the price was carved into stone. The courtyard was littered with bodies, men, women, children alike. Their cries still echoed long after the arrows ceased. I sank to my knees, tears burning, bile rising in my throat. Pharaoh stood tall, his chest heaving, his crown gleaming with blood. His voice rang hollow through the silence. Let Egypt remember. Pharaoh endures. The flame endures, yet as I looked upon the carnage, the broken bodies of our people, I whispered to the beads at my throat, this was not victory. This was damnation. The throne stands, but upon a mountain of the dead, and Egypt will never forgive far below in the catacombs. The high priest's laughter rolled through the darkness, cruel and triumphant. Good. Let Pharaoh drown his own people in blood. Every arrow loosed, every corpse fallen, feeds us. Flame burns brighter, but only to consume herself. The palace stank of blood for days. No incense could mask it, no chants could drown it. The marble steps were scrubbed until they shone, but still I saw the stains, dark as shadow. I smelled them in my sleep. Pharaoh called it triumph. He sat tall upon his throne, his voice booming to the council. Egypt has learned. No mob rises against Pharaoh and lives. The gods themselves struck through my hand. The generals bowed, but their eyes wavered. Nobles lowered their heads, but whispers hissed behind their silks. And I saw truth in their silence. Outside the walls, Thebes did not kneel. It wept. Mothers tore their veils, fathers howled their grief, children wandered the streets, calling names that would never answer. Every arrow that had fallen from the walls had carved not obedience, but hate. The markets grew empty. Tribute ceased to flow. Villages refused to send grain. And in distant cities, statues of Pharaoh were daubed with ash and curses, his name spat like poison. At night, fires burned on the horizon, farmlands torched, shrines desecrated, banners of revolt rising in the wind. And in the harem, the women's laughter grew bold. See how Pharaoh drenches Egypt in blood for her sake? Each corpse binds him tighter to her curse. Let him cling to his flame. Soon both will burn. Pharaoh heard none of it. Or if he did, he silenced it with rage. He clung to me as if my presence alone kept the throne from crumbling. His hands shook when he held mine, his eyes hollow when he whispered in the night. They do not understand. You are my strength. Without you I am ash. Do not leave me, flame. Do not leave me. But even as I whispered back, I will not leave. I felt the walls closing, the kingdom collapsing. His love bound me, but his love could not save Egypt. And far below, in the catacombs, the high priest's voice thundered in the dark, carried by the chants of his acolytes. Pharaoh spills his people's blood. Egypt turns its face. The throne cracks. Soon the shadows will rise, not as whispers, but as kings once more. I stood at the balcony, watching the fires on the horizon, listening to the cries that drifted through the night. The beads at my throat felt heavier than chains. I whispered into the smoke. This is no longer unrest. It is ruin, and ruin does not bow. The fires did not fade. They multiplied. Messengers came breathless to the palace gates, each with worse tidings than the last. Memphis refuses Pharaoh's decree. Abydos has driven out its governors. The Delta tribes march under banners of the old gods. Pharaoh roared at each report, his staff cracking the floor, his voice thundering, "Traitors! Rats gnawing at Pharaoh's throne. I will grind them into dust." But even his generals no longer cheered his fury. Their eyes were heavy, their silence long. In the city, the unrest became open war. Black banners marked with ash and the sigils of forgotten gods rose above rooftops. Priests, once scattered, now strode openly through the markets, their chants echoing, their followers kneeling at their feet. "Shadows endure," they cried, "and Pharaoh falls." Crowds swelled at their words, not in whispers, but in shouts. Stones gave way to spears, torches became banners of revolt. And for the first time, drums of war thundered not only beyond the palace, but within it. Servants vanished in the night, their stations left empty. Guards slipped away from their posts, some fleeing to families, others to the rebels themselves. Even among the generals, I heard it. Rumors that some had sworn secret oaths to the priests, waiting only for the moment to turn. One evening, the horizon burned. From the balcony, I saw it. Fires stretching from the banks of the Nile to the edge of the desert, a tide of rebellion sweeping ever closer. Pharaoh stood beside me, his face a mask of fury and pride. He lifted his arms to the heavens, his voice tearing the night. "Let them come. Let all Egypt rise against Pharaoh if it dares. I will burn them as I burned their gods." His roar shook the palace, but not the earth beneath it. For below, in the streets, the people no longer trembled. They roared back, "Down with Pharaoh, down with the flame. Shadows endure." And in the catacombs, the high priest raised both arms, his followers kneeling in a sea of torches. His voice rang triumphant. "The Nile rises, the cities burn, the throne cracks. Soon the palace will fall. Egypt returns to its gods. Pharaoh will be no more." I pressed the beads to my throat, the weight unbearable, the air thick with smoke and cries. My whisper broke in the night. This is no longer rebellion. It is revolution. And when revolution comes, it devours not only kings, but all who stand beside them. It began with the sound of horns, low, deep, endless, rolling across the desert night like the roar of 1,000 beasts. I woke from uneasy sleep, the beads cold against my throat, and rushed to the balcony. The horizon burned, not with scattered fires this time, but with an unbroken chain of torches stretching as far as the eye could see. The rebels had come not as mobs, but as an army. Drums thundered in the distance. Dust rose beneath countless feet. Banners of the old gods snapped in the wind, black with ash, red with blood, marked with the sigils of Amun and Ra, gods Pharaoh had cursed. And there, at the center, a great chariot rolled forward. Upon it stood the high priest, his arms raised, his voice carrying even across the distance. Egypt returns. Pharaoh falls. Shadows endure. The city gates burst open, not from without, but from within. Thebes itself had betrayed Pharaoh, throwing wide its arms to welcome the rebels. Pharaoh stormed to the walls, his crown blazing, his staff raised high. His roar split the night. "Traitors, you dare rise against Pharaoh? Then Egypt shall burn with you." Arrows loosed from the battlements, flaming missiles streaking across the sky. But the rebels surged forward, their numbers endless, their chants drowning the clash of bronze. The palace walls shuddered beneath their assault, the gates trembling under the strike of rams. Inside, chaos reigned. Servants fled, guards deserted, even some generals vanished into the night. The harem wailed, their cries sharp as knives, some praying for Pharaoh, others whispering curses against me. I stood at the balcony, the smoke stinging my eyes, my breath ragged. Below me, the world was fire and fury, the air torn with screams and drums. The beads at my throat burned like chains. Pharaoh turned to me, his face carved with rage and desperation. His voice shook not with fear, but with defiance. They come for me. They come for you. But Pharaoh does not fall. If Egypt must burn, then Pharaoh will burn with it. And you, my flame, you will burn beside me. His grip tightened on my hand, iron, unyielding. And in that moment, I knew. The siege was not just of the palace, but of us. The walls groaned, stones cracking, flames climbing higher. And from below, the chant rose, endless, deafening. Down with Pharaoh. Down with the flame. Shadows endure. The siege thundered through the night. Battering rams smashed the gates, their iron heads pounding like the heartbeat of doom. Arrows hissed through the air, torches arced, flames licked higher against the palace walls. The ground itself shook beneath the charge of thousands. Pharaoh stood upon the battlements, his crown blazing, his staff raised like a weapon of the gods. His roar split the sky. Pharaoh endures. Pharaoh is Egypt. His guards, few though they were, answered with a cry. They loosed their arrows, their spears, their fury. But for every rebel that fell, 10 more surged forward, their chants drowning the clash of bronze. Down with Pharaoh, down with the flame, shadows endure. I watched from the balcony as the gates groaned, splintering, until at last they burst open in a storm of fire and iron. The rebels poured through like a flood, their banners snapping, their voices wild with triumph. The courtyard became a slaughterhouse. Guards fought to the last, their blood staining the stones they had sworn to protect. Women screamed from the harem, some praying, others cursing. Servants fled, only to be cut down in the chaos. Pharaoh leapt into the fray, his staff a weapon, his roar a storm. He struck men down with his own hand, his crown glinting red in the firelight. He was no king then. He was a beast, a lion cornered, fighting not for throne but for breath. And still, through the smoke and carnage, I felt their eyes upon me. There, the cursed flame. Hands reached, blades flashed, stones clattered at my feet. Guards closed around me, but their shields shook, their eyes wide. For every rebel that fell, another took his place, all hungering for my blood. Pharaoh saw. His roar shook the night. No hand touches her. She is Pharaoh's flame. She burns with me, or not at all. But his cry only stoked their fury. They surged higher, clawing the walls, their chants a storm. Kill her! Kill the curse! I clutched the beads at my throat, my breath shallow, my whisper breaking into the smoke. Flame burns, but flame cannot hold against a flood. The palace walls cracked. Towers fell in showers of stone and fire. The throne of Egypt, once unshakable, trembled beneath the weight of its own people. And from the heart of the rebels, upon his chariot, the high priest raised both hands, his voice carrying like thunder. The gods return. Pharaoh falls. The flame dies tonight. The palace corridors, once filled with music and perfume, now echoed with screams and the clash of steel. Flames devoured tapestries. Smoke clawed the ceilings. Statues toppled, their faces shattering upon the marble floors. Pharaoh dragged me into the great hall, the very place where he had once proclaimed his glory. Now it was a fortress of desperation, Guards, bloodied and broken, formed a last ring around us. Their shields dented, their eyes hollow, yet still they stood. The doors groaned as rebels battered them from without. Dust rained from the beams, the hinges buckled, splinters flying with every strike. Pharaoh lifted his staff high, his voice raw with rage and defiance. "This is Pharaoh's house. Let it stand, even in ruin. Let it fall only when Pharaoh himself falls." The guards answered with a cry, their voices cracking, yet fierce. I clutched the beads at my throat, my breath shallow, my body trembling. The air reeked of smoke and blood, the roar of the mob louder than thunder. The doors burst inward. Rebels flooded the hall, their eyes wild, their blades dripping with firelight. Pharaoh roared, hurling himself into their midst. His staff cracked skulls, his crown blazed, his fury unmatched. For a moment, he seemed invincible, a god of wrath in mortal flesh. Men fell before him, trampled in their own blood. But their numbers were endless. The guards fell one by one, their cries echoing, their bodies broken upon the stones. The ring around us thinned, until at last only a handful remained, shields splintered, spears snapped. And still the rebels cried, their voices one. "Down with Pharaoh! Kill the flame!" Their eyes fixed on me. Hands reached, blades slashed. A spear grazed my arm, another tore my veil. I stumbled, clutching the beads, my heart hammering like a drum. Pharaoh saw. With a roar that shook the hall, he tore through the crowd, his staff shattering bone, his crown glinting red. He reached me, blood streaming from his brow, his breath ragged. His hand seized mine, iron and trembling. His voice was a whisper, fierce and broken. "They will not have you." Not while Pharaoh breathes, I pressed the beads to my lips, my whisper lost in the roar. "Then let flame and crown burn together." The mob surged, the hall shook, the flames rose higher, and in that storm of blood and fire, the throne of Egypt trembled, balanced upon its last breath. The hall shook as the last of the guards fell. Shields clattered upon marble, spears snapped beneath trampling feet. The air was thick with smoke, screams, and the metallic stench of blood. Pharaoh stood at the center, his crown askew, his staff cracked but unbroken. His chest heaved, his body streaked with blood, yet his eyes still blazed with fury. I clung to his side, the beads at my throat burning cold as ice. The rebels parted suddenly, their chants silenced, their blades lowered. Into the hall rolled a chariot, its wheels grinding over broken stone, its banners black as night. Upon it stood the high priest, his arms spread wide, his robes billowing like wings of shadow. His face was painted with ash, his eyes gleamed with triumph. His voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a whisper that filled the hall like thunder. "Pharaoh bleeds. Egypt rises. The gods return," Pharaoh roared, raising his staff, his voice breaking with rage. "Traitor! You dare profane Pharaoh's house?" The high priest stepped down, his bare feet touching the blood-soaked marble as though it were holy ground. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step echoing louder than the clash of battle. He stopped before us, his gaze fixed not on Pharaoh, but on me. "The flame," he breathed. "The curse that blinded him, the spark that burned Egypt to ash. End her, and Pharaoh falls. End her, and Egypt is free." The mob answered with a thunderous cry, "Kill the flame! Kill the flame!" Pharaoh's arm tightened around me, his body a shield, his voice raw. No hand touches her while Pharaoh stands. The high priest smiled, slow and cruel. "Then Pharaoh shall stand no more. At his signal, The rebels surged again. Spears bristled, blades gleamed, the hall erupted once more into chaos. Pharaoh struck like a lion, but the tide was endless. And as I clutched the beads, trembling in the storm of fire and blood, I knew. The moment had come when crown and flame would either burn together or be extinguished forever. The high priest advanced, his chariot left behind, his steps slow but unyielding. The rebels held their ground, forming a circle, their chants falling to silence as if the gods themselves demanded witness. Pharaoh stood tall, though blood streamed down his brow. His staff, cracked and splintered, was clutched tight in his hand. He placed himself before me, his body a wall of flesh and fury. "Shadow has no throne here," Pharaoh thundered, his voice raw but unbroken. "Egypt is mine, Egypt is flame." The high priest spread his arms, his smile sharp as a blade. "Egypt was never yours. You cursed its gods, you bled its people, you chained it to a woman of fire. Look upon your kingdom now, Pharaoh. Look upon the ashes. This is your reign." Pharaoh's roar shook the marble. He lunged, his staff arcing through the air. The priest raised no shield, only lifted his hand. The clash was thunder. Wood struck flesh, sparks of blood spraying. The priest staggered but did not fall, his laughter chilling as it echoed through the hall. He spoke words I could not understand. Old as stone, his voice a hiss of forgotten gods. The torches flared, the flames bending toward him, shadows twisting like serpents along the walls. The rebels howled in ecstasy, their blades striking the marble in rhythm with his chant. Pharaoh pressed forward, his staff striking again and again, each blow a storm of fury. The priest parried with nothing but his voice, his body absorbing the punishment, his eyes glowing with something not human. At last, with a roar, Pharaoh drove the staff into the priest's chest, splintering the wood. Blood poured, the sound sharp, final. The priest gasped, staggered, yet his smile widened. "You strike me, Pharaoh. But you cannot strike the gods." He fell to his knees, his blood pooling at his feet. The rebels shrieked, their voices a storm of rage. But in his final breath, the priest's words carried like prophecy. The flame dies, and with it, the crown. He collapsed, lifeless, upon the stones. The hall erupted. Rebels surged forward, their fury unchained. Pharaoh raised what remained of his staff, his roar breaking into the storm. I clutched the beads at my throat, my voice trembling in the chaos. Crown and flame, they will burn together. And the last defense of Pharaoh's house dissolved into fire and blood. The hall was no longer stone and marble, it was fire. Flames devoured the pillars, smoke poured from the roof. The golden banners of Pharaoh curled into black ash. The rebels screamed as they surged forward, their blades flashing red in the firelight, their feet trampling the corpses of guard and noble alike. Pharaoh fought like a god undone. His crown had slipped, his staff shattered, but still he roared, his bare hands striking, his body unyielding. He was no longer king, no longer man. He was defiance itself, standing in the ruin of his throne. Yet the tide was endless. I clung to him, the beads at my throat burning, my breath ragged in the smoke. Every eye sought me, every blade turned towards me. Their voices tore the sky. Kill the flame, kill the curse. The guards were gone, the nobles fled. Even the harem scattered like frightened birds. Only Pharaoh remained between me and the storm. Then came the crash. The roof groaned, beams split, a tower collapsed in thunder, raining fire and stone into the hall. Rebels and loyalists alike screamed as the world itself seemed to fall. Pharaoh pulled me close, his arms iron, his breath hot with blood. His voice was a whisper in my ear, fierce even as the palace crumbled. They will not take you. Not while Pharaoh breathes, but I saw it, the truth carved into the fire. The palace was lost, the throne was broken, Pharaoh's reign was bleeding out upon the stones. Hands seized me, rough and merciless, dragging me from his grasp. I screamed, the beads tearing at my throat as I clutched them, my voice breaking. Pharaoh roared, lunging, but blades pierced him, spears drove him back. His cries shook the hall, his blood sprayed the flames. And still he fought, still he reached for me. The last I saw before darkness swallowed me was his crown tumbling from his head, rolling across the marble, vanishing into the fire. And then I was gone, dragged into shadow, into silence, into the hands of those who had waited for this night. Far below, in the catacombs, the high priest's body lay cold. Yet his prophecy lived, whispered upon every rebel's lips. The flame dies, and with it, the crown. When I woke, the world was stone and darkness. The air was damp, thick with the stench of earth and blood. Chains bit into my wrists, iron cold against my skin. The beads, my beads, still clung to my throat, though their glow was gone, their warmth extinguished. I tried to move, but the chains held me fast. Shadows stirred beyond the torchlight, figures watching, silent, their eyes burning with hatred. Whispers filled the chamber. The flame has fallen. She will burn no more. Let her taste the darkness she brought to Egypt. I closed my eyes, my breath trembling. Images flashed through my mind. Pharaoh's roar, his blood upon the stones, his crown rolling into fire. My heart ached, hollow, broken. Was he alive still? Or had the fire claimed him at last? The shadows parted. From the darkness stepped the high priest, alive, wounded, his chest bandaged, his step slow, but alive. His smile curved sharp as a knife, his voice a whisper that filled the chamber. Did you think the gods would let me fall so easily, Flame? Number. My blood is theirs, my breath their breath, and now yours is mine. He approached, his fingers brushing the beads at my throat. I flinched, but the chains held me fast. These, he said softly, were your crown, your power, but power without worship is nothing. Pharaoh is gone. Egypt is mine. And you. He leaned close, his breath cold against my ear. You will kneel, or you will break. The crowd roared approval, their voices echoing through the stone. Break her! Break the flame! I raised my head, my voice hoarse but unyielding. I am flame. I burn even in chains. The high priest's smile widened. Then let us see how long flame endures. Without air. He turned, raising his arms to the crowd, their chants shaking the walls. And I knew then, my trial had only begun. They dragged me into the great cavern beneath the city, where the priests had gathered their followers. Torches ringed the stone walls, their flames trembling as if afraid. The air reeked of sweat, incense, and blood. The people filled the chamber, packed shoulder to shoulder, their eyes burning with hate. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering, "See, this is the curse that bled Egypt." Men spat at the ground as I passed, their curses sharp as stones. The high priest stood at the center, his robes torn from battle yet gleaming with triumph. He lifted his arms, his voice echoing, "Behold the flame that blinded Pharaoh. Behold the curse that turned Egypt to ash. What burns without fuel? What endures when love is dust?" The crowd answered with a roar, "Break her! Break the flame!" Chains rattled as I was forced to my knees. My hair was seized, my head yanked back so that people could see my face. Spittle struck my cheeks. Stones bounced from the floor around me. The high priest circled, his smile cruel. She is no queen, no goddess, no power. She is flesh, weak, trembling, alone. Pharaoh's shield is gone. His throne lies in ruin. Now she kneels before Egypt. The crowd jeered, their voices like thunder. Some hurled food, others dust. A woman pressed forward, tears streaking her face, and screamed, "My son died by Pharaoh's arrows. His blood is on her hands." She struck me, her palm sharp across my cheek. The crowd howled its approval. More followed, hands, fists, stones, each blow a piece of their grief, their rage, their hatred. I tasted blood, warm and bitter. My body ached, my vision blurred. Still I forced the words through my lips, my voice raw but steady. I am flame. I burn up. The high priest laughed, cruel and triumphant. He lifted the beads from my throat, tearing them away, holding them high for all to see. Here is her fire. See how easily it is stolen. The crowd roared, their fury fed, their grief sharpened into vengeance. I collapsed against the chains, my breath shallow, my body broken. Yet inside, deeper than flesh, something still smoldered. Not pride, not power, love. For even as the mob's voices echoed, I saw him in my mind. Pharaoh, bloodied but unbroken, his roar shaking the halls, his hand reaching for mine. I felt the weight of his crown in that last moment, the warmth of his grip, the fire in his eyes. And my whisper, though lost in the storm, burned within me. They cannot take you from me. Not in chains, not in darkness, not even in death. When the crowd's fury had ebbed, when their voices faded into the tunnels, they dragged me back to the cell. The chains clanged against the walls as they locked me inside, leaving me to the silence of stone. The torches guttered low. The air was thick, damp, suffocating. My body ached from the blows, my skin marked with bruises, my lips cut and swollen. Blood crusted where the beads had torn from my throat, leaving me naked, stripped of the only crown I had ever worn. I lay upon the cold floor, staring into darkness. At first, I thought it empty. But then, I heard him, not in flesh, not in voice, but in memory. Pharaoh's roar echoing through the halls of fire. His hand, iron and trembling, clutching mine. His eyes blazing even as the world collapsed. And more than that, his whispers in the night, when no crown weighed his head, when no court listened, when he was only man. "You are my strength," he had said. "Without you, I am ash." Tears stung my eyes, hot and bitter. I pressed my wrists against my lips, the iron cold, my whisper trembling in the dark. And without you, what am I? Sleep would not come. Every sound in the tunnels made me start. The drip of water, the scuttle of rats, the faint echo of distant chants. Each breath tasted of earth and despair, yet in the silence, his memory grew sharper. I remembered the first night he had called me flame, his voice reverent, his hand upon my cheek. I remembered the way his gaze pierced through the venom of the harem, the lies of the noble, the hatred of the priests. I remembered his crown slipping as he fought not for Egypt, but for me. And I clung to it, not to the beads, not to the throne, not to the fire of the mob's hatred, but to him, to the man who had held me when the world itself was crumbling. In the dark, chained and broken, my whisper rose again. I am flame. And though the world calls me curse, though chains bind me, though blood stains my hands, I burn still, because I burn for him. The silence did not answer. Yet in the hollow of the cell, the warmth of that memory wrapped around me like a cloak, fragile but real. And so I endured. The days blurred together. Stone, silence, whispers. I no longer knew if it was dawn or dusk beyond the cavern walls. Only the drip of water marked time, steady as the beat of a dying heart. Then, one night, the silence broke. The scrape of iron, the heavy groan of a door. Torches flared, casting long shadows against the stone. I squinted through the glare, and my breath caught. They dragged him in. Pharaoh. No crown, no staff, no robes of gold. Chains bit into his wrists, blood streaked his chest, his face hollow with exhaustion. Yet even broken, even bound, he carried himself with the weight of kingship, his back unbowed, his eyes burning like embers refusing to die. The guards flung him to the floor opposite me. The chains rattled, the iron echoing like thunder in the cavern. He staggered, lifted his head, and our eyes met. For a moment, the world fell away. The smoke, the screams, the blood, all gone. Only him, only me. Flame. His voice was a rasp, hoarse and broken, but it was his. You live. Tears blurred my sight. I pressed forward against the chains, my wrists raw, my voice trembling. I live. Because you did not let me die. He crawled toward me, each movement heavy with pain. The guards laughed, jeering, but did not stop him. Perhaps they wanted this, to watch a king reduced to crawling in chains. At last, he reached me. His hand, torn and bleeding, found mine. Our fingers locked, iron against iron, blood against blood. His whisper trembled, fierce even in ruin. They cannot break us. Not you, not me. We burn. Together I pressed my forehead to his, our chains clinking, our tears mingling. My whisper answered his, steady though my body shook. Together. Even in darkness, even in death from the shadows. The high priest's laughter rolled, soft and cruel. He stepped into the light, his smile sharp as the blade at his belt. Let Egypt see its king, not upon a throne, not upon a battlefield, but in chains, clinging to a woman, to a curse. Together, yes, but together you will break, the crowd roared, their chants rising once more. Break them, break the crown, break the flame. But as their voices thundered, Pharaoh's hand tightened around mine, his eyes burning into me. And in that fire I knew we were broken in flesh, but not in soul. At dawn they dragged us from our cells. Chains bit our wrists, iron collars bruised our throats. The corridors echoed with the jeers of guards as they pulled us upward, through winding tunnels that bled into light. We emerged into the great square of Thebes, the same square where Pharaoh had once stood, staff raised, declaring Egypt's glory. Now it was filled not with worship, but with wrath. The people thronged shoulder to shoulder, their voices a storm. Down with Pharaoh! Down with the flame! Break them both! They shoved us to our knees upon the stone platform. The sun beat down, merciless, glinting from the spears of the rebels. Children perched upon rooftops to see. Mothers pointed at me, hissing, "There is the curse." Men spat at Pharaoh, shouting, "Tyrant! Murderer!" The high priest rose upon the steps of the temple, his robes flowing, his voice rolling like thunder. Behold, Pharaoh stripped of crown, his flame stripped of power. Once they stood above Egypt, but now Egypt stands above them. Today, the gods judge. Today, the curse is broken. The crowd roared. Pharaoh lifted his head, blood streaking his face, his voice hoarse but fierce. You call this judgment? You are cowards, hiding behind gods you never honored until it suited your vengeance. Egypt will remember. Pharaoh endures. A spear struck his shoulder, hurled from the mob. He staggered, but did not fall. They turned to me next. A woman stepped forward, her face hollow with grief. She raised a torch, the flame trembling in her hand. My son died by your arrows, she spat. Now you will feel his fire. The torch seared my arm, pain lancing through me like lightning. I bit my lip until blood filled my mouth, refusing to scream. Pharaoh bellowed, straining against the chains. Touch her again, and Pharaoh will tear your hearts from your chests. The crowd laughed, their jeers sharp as knives. More torches came. The smell of burned flesh rose, the heat blistering my skin. Stones struck us, sharp and merciless. Blood streaked the platform, mingling with ash. Yet through it all, his hand found mine. Our chains clinked, binding us together. His grip was iron, his whisper ragged but steady. Do not break, flame. Not before them I turned my head, our foreheads meeting, sweat and blood mingling. My voice was a whisper only he could hear. I burn still, and with you I will never break. The high priest raised his arms, the crowd roaring at his gesture. See how they cling like rats bound for drowning. Egypt, behold your curse, weak in flesh, stubborn in spirit. We will break them yet, but as their voices thundered, as their blows rained down, I clung tighter. Pain consumed my body, but love consumed my soul. And in that square of hate and fire, I knew. They could scar us. They could chain us. They could bleed us. But they could not unmake us. Not while we still held each other. The square shook with the people's cries, their fists raised, their voices one endless storm. Kill them. Break the curse. Let them burn. The high priest lifted his hands, and silence fell like a blade. Even the children hushed, even the torches seemed to bow to his voice. He looked upon us, Pharaoh bleeding, broken yet unbound, me scarred, chained, yet still clutching his hand. His smile curved, cold and cruel. Egypt has suffered, he said, his voice rolling across the square. Crops wither, the Nile shrinks, temples crumble. And why? Because Pharaoh turned from the gods. Because he gave his throne to a flame not born of Egypt's heart. Together, they brought ruin. He spread his arms, robes billowing in the hot wind. Now, Egypt demands balance. Blood for blood, flame for ashes, Pharaoh for Egypt. The crowd roared, their cries shaking the stones. Kill them! Kill them both! The high priest's gaze turned to me. You, flame, will burn. Your ashes scattered to the Nile so no man remembers your name. And you, Pharaoh. He stepped closer, his whisper slicing the silence. You will watch. You will watch as the gods strip from you the last thing you love. Only then will you break. Only then will Egypt be free. Pharaoh's roar split the air, his chains rattling as he lunged. Coward! You dare call this justice? Strike me, not her. Pharaoh bleeds, but Pharaoh does not kneel. The high priest only laughed, raising his arms to the crowd. Tomorrow, when the sun stands highest, the flame shall burn upon the altar, and Pharaoh shall watch her turn to ash. Egypt will see the gods restored and the curse undone. The mob erupted, chanting, stomping, their torches flaring high. Burn her. Burn the flame. Tomorrow, tomorrow. Guards dragged us back, chains biting into flesh. Pharaoh fought like a lion, but they struck him down with spears, blood smearing the stones. I was holed beside him, our hands torn apart. Though our eyes clung still, his voice, ragged, thundered through the chaos. They cannot take you from me. Not tomorrow, not ever, I whispered back, my throat raw, my tears burning. Then if I burn, we burn together. The crowd's chants swallowed our words, the square trembling with their hunger. And above them all, the high priest's laughter rang like prophecy. The night before, the sentence was darker than any I had known. No torches lit the tunnels, no guards lingered at the bars. Only the drip of water echoed, steady as the ticking of fate. They had thrown us together at last, bound by chains but close enough that our hands could find each other in the dark. His fingers, rough and torn, trembled as they closed around mine. For a long while we said nothing. Our breaths mingled, our chains clinked with each heartbeat. At last, his voice broke the silence, low and hoarse. They mean to burn you, flame. They mean to break me by watching you turn to ash. I pressed my forehead to his, my whisper steady though my chest shook. They cannot break what burns by choice. If fire is my fate, then I will embrace it. But you, my words faltered, you must live. Egypt still needs its king. His laugh was bitter, raw. Egypt has turned. My throne lies in ruins. They do not need their king. They want his corpse. I reached up, my chained hand brushing his cheek. His skin was hot, fevered, yet beneath it I felt the same strength that had once shaken courts and armies. Then live not for Egypt. Live for me. If I burn, let my fire live in you. His breath caught, his eyes closing. A tear, rare and unyielding, traced down his cheek. You were never curse. You were my crown, my strength, my life. If you burn tomorrow, flame, then Pharaoh burns with you. I kissed the tear from his cheek, the iron of our chains clinking between us. My whisper trembled into his lips. Then promise me, if they strike me down, you will not kneel. Stand tall, even in chains. Let them see that Pharaoh's love is not broken by fire. He gripped me tighter, his whisper fierce as a vow. I promise, if they burn you, I will roar until my last breath shakes the stones. I will carry you in my fire. We will burn together. Silence returned, heavy, endless. But in that silence, warmth lingered between us, fragile as breath, strong as eternity. And though dawn would bring flames and chains, in that moment I felt no fear, only love, only fire. The dawn came not with birdsong, but with drums. Low, heavy, relentless. They shook the stones beneath us, echoing through the tunnels. Guards stormed into the cell, dragging us from the floor, our chains biting deep into flesh. We were hauled upward, through corridors stinking of smoke and incense, until light struck our faces, harsh, merciless. The square was overflowing. Men, women, and children pressed shoulder to shoulder, their chants already swelling. Burn the flame, burn the curse. Torches blazed along the walls, casting the square in a cruel glow. At its center rose a great altar of stone, blackened by soot, its surface piled with wood and oil. The stench of pitch filled the air, choking, clinging. They shoved me forward. My knees struck the stone, my wrists yanked behind me. Chains rattled as they bound me to the altar, cold iron against skin. The crowd screamed its triumph, voices crashing like waves. Some hurled stones, others curses. I lifted my head, refusing to bow, though my body trembled. Then they dragged him in. Pharaoh, bloodied, shackled, stripped of crown, yet still his gaze burned. The crowd's rage split in two. Some jeered at him, others spat at me. But none could silence the thunder of their chant. Burn her! Break him! They forced him to his knees at the foot of the altar. His eyes locked on mine, fierce even through pain. His voice tore through the chaos. They cannot touch you. You are flame eternal. The high priest rose upon the temple steps, arms spread wide. His voice rolled like thunder, drowning even the crowd. Behold, the flame that cursed Egypt, bound and helpless. Behold Pharaoh, brought low, crownless, chained. Today, Egypt is cleansed. Today, the gods are avenged. The mob howled its approval. Drums thundered, the torches lifted. And as the priest descended toward me, torch in hand, my heart hammered, my breath ragged, I pressed the beads that no longer hung at my throat, only their memory burning within me. My whisper trembled through the roar, meant only for him. If I burn, remember, we burn together. His chains rattled as he lunged forward, his roar shaking the air. Then let Egypt see, Pharaoh and flame do not break. The priest's torch lowered, the crowd screamed, and the altar shuddered beneath me. The torch descended. Its flame hissed as it touched the oil-soaked wood, and in an instant, the altar roared to life. Heat surged upward, blistering, hungry. Smoke curled thick into the morning air, carrying with it the cries of the crowd, "Burn the flame! Burn the curse!" The fire licked at my ankles, heat searing through cloth and skin. Pain shot like lightning, tearing a scream from my throat. Chains rattled as I writhed, my body arching against the iron. Pharaoh bellowed from below, his voice a storm that shook the square. No! Touch her, and you touch Pharaoh himself. He hurled himself forward, chains biting deep as he dragged the guards with him. Blood streamed from his wrists, but still he fought, his roar echoing above the mob. Unchain me! Strike me, not her. Pharaoh bleeds before flame does. The high priest only laughed, his face alight with triumph. See, Egypt? Even now he bows to her. Even now he cannot stand without his flame. This is your king, broken by a woman, chained by his own weakness. The crowd howled, stones flying, curses tearing the sky. Flames surged higher, smoke choking my breath. My eyes blurred with tears, but still I found him. His face bloodied, his body straining against iron, his gaze locked on mine. Flame! He roared. You do not die alone. My lips cracked, my voice a whisper ragged with pain. I burn for you. Always the altar shook as wood collapsed, sparks spiraling upward. The heat devoured my senses, the roar of fire drowning the mob. My vision swam, but in its haze I saw him. Still fighting, still roaring, still reaching for me through the flames. The high priest lifted his arms, his voice booming above the inferno. Egypt is cleansed. The curse burns. The gods are avenged. But even as he spoke, Pharaoh's voice split the sky, fierce and unbroken. No god owns her fire. She is mine, Pharaoh and flame, one until the end. And for a heartbeat, even through the agony, I believed him. That if I burned not his curse, but his love made flesh. Fire eternal, unyielding, defiant. The fire surged higher, roaring like a beast unchained. Heat scorched the air, smoke clawed my lungs. My body writhed against the chains, each breath a battle, each heartbeat a wound. The crowd's cries blurred into one endless roar. Burn the flame! Break the crown! Below me, Pharaoh fought like a man possessed. Chains cut his flesh, guards drove spears into his sides, yet he rose again and again, dragging them with him. His roar split the smoke. Unhand me. Pharaoh does not kneel. Blood streaked his chest. His face was a mask of fury and pain. And yet, his eyes never left mine. The high priest lifted his arms, his voice booming. "Behold your king, watching his flame burn, helpless, broken. Let Egypt be cleansed." The mob screamed in triumph. And then Pharaoh moved. With a cry that shook the heavens, he hurled himself forward. The chains snapped taut, iron biting into flesh, tearing his skin, but still he surged. Guards fell beneath his fury, trampled in his wake. Blood sprayed the stones, his crownless head blazing brighter than gold. "Flame!" he roared. "If you burn, I burn with you." With a final wrench, the chains shattered. Iron links scattered across the stones. Pharaoh rose, broken but unbound, his body a storm of blood and fire. The crowd gasped, their cries faltering. For in that moment, he was no longer a man, no longer a king. He was defiance itself. He charged the altar, driving through the guards, spears breaking against his chest. His hands seized the wood, his body surging into the flames. The heat swallowed him. The fire engulfed us both. I felt his arms around me, strong even in ruin. His voice was a whisper against my ear, fierce and unbroken. Together flame. Always, the world was fire. The crowd's screams faded into silence. The high priest's triumph curdled into horror. And as the flames devoured flesh and crown alike, I knew they had not broken us. They never could. We burned, not as curse, not as ruin, but as love eternal. The square fell silent. For a breath, for a heartbeat, there were no chants, no jeers, only fire. The altar blazed like the sun itself, the flames roaring into the sky. And within it, Pharaoh and I burned, bound not by chains, but by love. Our bodies consumed, our whispers carried into eternity. The crowd, once wild with fury, stood frozen. Mothers clutched their children, men dropped their stones, women covered their faces. The air was thick, not with triumph, but with awe. For Pharaoh had not begged. He had not knelt. He had chosen. He had leapt into the fire, not to save his throne, but to share my fate. And in that act, something shifted. The chants faltered. A murmur rippled through the mob, soft, uncertain. Pharaoh did not break. He burned with her, together, even in death. The high priest, standing tall upon the steps, raised his arms to reclaim their fury. "Behold, the curse is ended. Egypt is free." But the words fell flat. The people did not cheer. Their eyes were no longer on him, but on the fire. For in the flames, two shapes lingered, two silhouettes, crowned by light, holding each other still. Flesh burned, but love endured, defiant even against death. The priest's voice broke. He screamed, he cursed, he called upon the gods. But the gods did not answer. Only the fire did, and the fire belonged to us. Whispers spread like wind. They were not curse. They were love. No chains broke them. Fear turned upon the priest. Stones once meant for me now flew at him. Voices once chanting his name now spat it with venom. The mob that had followed him with blind fury turned upon its master. He fled the square, his robes torn, his cries lost beneath the storm. By dusk, the altar had burned to ash. The crowd had scattered, but their whispers remained, echoing through every street, every temple, every home. And so it began, our story. Not as curse, not as ruin, but as flame eternal. Mothers whispered it to their children, of Pharaoh who defied death, and the flame who burned beside him. Priests, once bold, dared not speak against it. Even the rebels carried it in secret, ashamed of their part. And in time, we became legend. Not names, not faces, not crown nor beads, but love. Love that burned so fiercely it could not be broken, not by chains, not by hatred, not even by fire. They had meant to erase us. Instead, they made us eternal. And so, in the heart of Egypt, where stone and sand keep the secrets of kings, the tale of Pharaoh and his flame was written not in scrolls, but in fire. They burned together. They died together. And together, they became something no crown, no priest, no empire could ever erase. When the Nile whispers at night, when the desert wind bends through the ruins, still their voices linger. Two hearts defiant, two souls unbroken. Not curse, not ruin, but love, eternal. I am flame, I whisper across the ages, and I burn still. And so, the flame did not die. It became legend. If their love, unbroken even by fire, touched your heart tonight, stay with us. There are more stories, more whispers from the ruins of time, waiting to be told. Wherever you are in the world, let the fire of story keep you company. Subscribe, and walk with me again into the echoes of history, where love, loss, and legend never fade. And so, the tale fades into silence. The echoes of time dissolve like mist over ancient seas. Thank you, dear traveler, for walking beside me through these forgotten worlds, for listening, for dreaming, for remembering. Wherever you are, under moonlight or morning sun, I hope these stories linger softly in your heart. Until we meet again, rest well, and let the past whisper you to sleep.